All right. Thanks everybody for joining this episode of Thumos School for Men. I'm your host, Charlie Ford, and today we have Kyle Clifton with us. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing great, Charlie. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's early today, man. We're hitting it nice and early. You got your cup of coffee, or do you drink coffee this early, or you wait a few hours?
I don't drink coffee anymore.
Ah, no coffee at all. Okay.
No, sir. I get
I've,
addicted to it,
yeah, I
and then I need more and more and more. Then I can't sleep well, and then I need more yet again, and I'm better off without it.
Man, I'm trying this wait 90 minutes after you wake up to
Hmm.
get the coffee thing. I've heard that's a good thing to do, apparently, but we'll see. But so how you doing, man? How's what are you doing these days?
Oh, I spend most of my time running a handyman business that I started about 7 months, 8 months ago. So we're in the growing process of that, along with raising a 20-month-old daughter. Life keeps me busy.
Nice. Did you being a handyman, is this something that you aspired to kind of separate and do at some point in your life? Like, were you doing this before with another company?
Not really, not like a handyman. I've been building and remodeling since I was 16, so I've got quite a bit of experience at it. My previous business was a general contractor, but when we moved to Texas, I just decided I was ready for something different. And I kind of felt like there was a need, a void for what I call a real company, just, really focused on building something that stands out from the crowd. A lot of we try to do super well with communication. We try to do, we've got a fancy CRM that sends on my way text with a picture of the technician coming and the location, and we just try to be as above board as we can with everything from start to finish. And it's like I was telling Kenny the other day, we was talking. I said, I don't. All I really have to do to be a successful company in today's world full of contractors cutting corners is just simply show up and do what I say I'll do when I say I'll do it. It's that simple. And bam, I've got a successful company just by doing that. Hey,
Just being reliable.
yep, reliable and honest, man. It is seems hard to come by these days. I hear it. I mean, almost every customer I show up, like, we had three or four people out. They screwed this up. They screwed that up. They didn't show up when they said they would. Every day I hear it. It's sad, really.
That reminds me of what the four agreements. One of the
Mhm.
four agreements, right? Just keeping your word.
Be impeccable with your word.
Yeah, man. So it was through this handyman business that you got involved with an organization that led you to meeting someone in Thumos and then joining Thumos. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, met Brooke at a BNI networking event.
Okay. Yeah, and so you joined Thumos a few, I don't know, about what was it? Has it been 6 months now?
It has been real close to 6 months. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I really wanted to get you on the podcast today because, through getting to know you in Thumos, we learned a lot about your background. And if you're willing today, man, it'd be great to hear kind of your story, um, especially around this topic of religion and spirituality. Because I know that's a kind of a heavy topic for you, and you've been through a lot with it. So, so maybe you could take us back a little bit about kind of your early upbringings and how you were introduced to religion.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And let me say that there's really no topic that gets me more excited. So this is awesome. Appreciate the chance to do this. So going back, I was born and raised in a extreme conservative religion. I'm going to call it Mennonite. It wasn't actually Mennonite, but for the intents and purposes, it's the most common name that people may recognize. Mennonite and Amish are similar. The main difference with Mennonites, most of them have electricity in cars, whereas most Amish don't. So I'll go with Mennonite. We I was raised. We had electricity. We had cars. No radios. No TVs. Very separate from most of society around us. We had our own schools, private schools. We didn't go to movies. We didn't go to sporting events. We dressed differently. So these are the people with that have their own uniform they wear to try to separate themselves from other people. The big hats. Yes, I had a beard halfway to my belly button at one time. Um, just very rule oriented religion. So I tell people they literally had a rule book 4 times thicker than the Bible. So they, for 100 years, 150 years, however long they've been an organization, they've been meeting every year to make up rules of how to live. Very, very much into following rules instead of feelings. So we were taught that feelings are bad, feelings are wrong. You can't trust your feelings. The only thing you can trust are, of course, the rules of the system. So that's what I was born into.
Is this was this a particular state? What was this confined to a particular state, or is this all over the U.S.?
It is all over the U.S. They don't live in every state. I was born and raised in western rural Ohio, a little tiny farming community. Um, Ohio, Indiana has groups. They have different groups scattered around. Each one is probably 100 or 150 members or less in each area, but there might be like 10 areas in Ohio itself. Um, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania has a lot of them. They're in California, Washington. Um, but anyway, overall, across the whole US, there's probably less than 5,000 people altogether.
Okay, and it's still is it still going pretty strong, like
Yes.
with a lot of members like that. So for folks that don't, maybe can't relate on growing up like that, what can you give us a day in the life of Kyle when how old were you when you were doing this through you were at least 10 years old, right? Still in this religion.
I was in this religion until I was 28 or 29 years old. Yes.
Okay, so that let's talk about you in your say preteen time frame. What does the day in the life of Kyle look like in that type of culture?
Well, like I said, I grew up in a very rural area. My dad had his own business. Had an excavation company. So my life was pretty much if going to school. We had a private school. It was actually just a mile up the road from where I lived. So often I would walk or ride my bike to school. Um, Everything about this religion, you could call it old fashioned. So very fundamental, very, very conservative, very old fashioned is what they try to be. That's the point behind, no radios, no TVs. Cell phones were a really slow thing to come into play. Um, they basically, just think of them being stuck 100 years back from everyone else or 50. So, go to school, come home. Um, if it was summertime, I was working with my dad. So that was a big deal. I mean, we grew up, I was running equipment when I was 10, 12 years old. Um, it's hard to describe it. So obviously you didn't have to come home and watch TV or jump on an iPad or anything like that. So um, it was just a lot of chores and doing things around the house and
So
hanging
there
out with
was,
friends.
yeah. So that, like, as far as friends, yeah, I guess that's where I was getting
Mm.
at. After school, do you I mean you hang out with friends? You'll just hang out outside. Were there? What about bikes? Like you ride bikes and do all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, rode bikes and um, I was actually a little bit of a black sheep, if you can call me that. My dad, he didn't ever join this religion, so my mom was part of it. My dad wasn't, but he just kind of followed her, like, went to church with her on Sundays, did everything that she did. He just never actually joined and became a member of the group. So when I say black sheep, he he still had the radios in the work trucks. So I got to hear, I was in between both sides, mom no radios, dad had radios. And we had four-wheelers, so ATVs. So we grew up with those dirt bikes. So I still had fun, just separate from most people in the community around having fun.
Okay. That's very interesting that your dad, I didn't realize that your dad wasn't part of it. So that was acceptable for a married couple for one of them not to be kind of embedded into the religion,
Let's say
I suppose.
frowned on, but yes, acceptable.
Wow. So he could really do whatever he wanted then. I mean, he could have a cell phone and TV. Did he have like a TV in a secret room in the house or something?
No, no TVs.
Okay. So this is your around teenage years. Did you how did you see yourself and how did you see I mean this is fundamental to you, right? So that it completely, I'm guessing it felt normal. Was there any time where you had a sort of an outer body experience in your teenage years of like seeing yourself as a very small percentage of the population in the way you lived?
No, man, that's the hard part about it is when you're raised in that sort of environment, it's just all you know. It's perfectly normal. It's at some point later in life, I would say later after the teen years, but I began to have questions, right? Like one of my biggest questions ever was if this is the only way to heaven, which is how they teach, why is 99.9% of new converts children of the existing people? Like, why isn't there any outside people coming into our group to be saved and go to heaven? Like, this doesn't make sense to me. So later in life, I just began to have questions like that. Um, they're big on, they actually don't believe in mission work. That's just another thing that got me like, we're not supposed to go out and save other people. But yet our way is the only way to heaven. Like this just doesn't make sense. Things like that just started to question. And but again, it wasn't till later, after I was married, after I was in the teen years, you're so brainwashed, so programmed that you don't even think about it. It's just the way of life, which is why most of their children join and become members later, in their teen years or later, because they've been so indoctrinated with the beliefs. It's hard to get away from. Very, very hard, as you'll hear a little bit later.
Okay. And yeah, before we get on, you mentioned marriage, so that also lends me to ask the question about boyfriends and girlfriends. Do they have when you're a teenager, did you go around looking for a girlfriend? I mean, how does that work out?
Oh yeah, we're still sexual beings. That part didn't change. Um, so I actually got a girl pregnant when I was 15, and that's uh that's a big, big, big no-no. And again, you're programmed to believe that if you do that, you need to get married. So we did. Um, yeah, married, had my first kid at 15, my first kid before I had my driver's license.
Wow, man. And how did that? I mean, did that when that happened? Did it still feel sort of normal as this is normal life?
Uh, well, getting married at 15 definitely wasn't normal. Um, but yeah, man, I was still completely blind, completely following the rules, completely doing what I was supposed to do, which is get married, raise a family. So it's what I did. Um, so this happened, where I lived there in Ohio. Things were kind of tense because of it all. Um, she was 7 years older than me, and people divided. People on my side of things kind of blamed her for the incident. So we ended up moving shortly after that to about 3 hours away into Indiana, where her family was from. And that's when I started. I went to work for her dad, building and remodeling. That's when I started that part of my life. Went on to have five more kids with her. Again, just doing my best to be the family man of hard, working hard to provide for my family because that's what we did. It's what we were supposed to do.
And so you say working hard. So at 15 years old, is that when did you go to you become a full-time worker at that point, or are you still doing education?
No, I dropped out of school completely and just working full time.
Okay. So you about that time around 16 or so, that's when you moved to Indiana? Okay. Wow. So you have five more kids. So you had a total of six kids with this your first wife.
Correct.
Um, and I didn't want to skip over this. I was going to ask you from a childhood standpoint in this religion. Um, I mean, one of the things that comes across to me is that because you don't have any of the other distractions, you're probably pretty high on connection, which makes sense if I can see, if you're attracted to someone that, you really don't have much other things to do, I would imagine you'd, kind of hang out and be connected. Um, so I just wanted to say before we move on to that piece, what are some of the things that you look at from your early childhood that are positive, like positive attributes of kind of that environment?
Well, there definitely are positive attributes. I mean, um, it's a very unique way of life, and it has its pros and cons. One of the pros is obviously just, you know, not not being i- involved in the world. I never knew anything about drugs. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I've never had a single opportunity to do drugs if I wanted to, which I never have. It's just, some of those things, being separate from, I would call a good thing, right? Although, looking back, I'm not 100% sure about that because I don't see mistakes the way I used to. But anyway, you get the point. I think that I'm trying to make is that, growing up in a rural society, separate from everything like that, we didn't we were close knit, like you said, a lot of connection, um, loving family, loving grandparents. Everybody's close. Everybody gets together. My grandparents lived just a mile and a half from me. Again, I could ride my bike over there and walk whenever I wanted. It's just it was a good life growing up like that. It'd be unique if I would view it a lot differently if you could grow up in that kind of a life without the religion, the rules. It's still a simple, quiet way of life, and I like that part of it.
So as we kind of move forward and you're married, you moved to Indiana. Were your parents at this point? You move away from your parents, correct? I mean, this is they're still in Ohio. How did they feel about your move?
Um, like I said, there was a lot of tension around the whole pregnancy incident. Um, they my parents obviously blamed her and weren't very happy about the whole thing and blamed it on her. So, I don't know for sure how they felt. I think they recognized that it was for the best that we get away and start fresh away from the drama. Um, but I'm sure it was hard for them too at the same time.
And was it any different for your dad? Being that he wasn't necessarily part of the religion, did he treat it any different?
No, he's a he is a very how do I say it? Quiet, reserved. Um, his life is his work, sort of thing. He wasn't super involved with us kids, other than being the disciplinary figure when needed. He worked a lot of hours, and so mom was kind of left to raise us. Um, he just, like I said, stepped in when needed, and so y- I've always had a interesting relationship with him. It's not like we're close, we can talk on the phone, we can talk in person about work and really surface level stuff, but I've never to this day been able to talk anything deep. I have no idea what he's feeling. He's not a person to share like that. So, to answer your question, I really don't know. He didn't, he wasn't very involved in the whole thing at all, other than, you know, setting in when needed in front of the judge or whatever to get things to happen. But as far as how he felt or what he thought, I have no idea because he never said as much.
Was that type of mentality fairly common in the religion for men to not express their emotions, or was this just unique to your dad?
Extremely common.
Okay, so emotions, thoughts, deep conversations. That stuff was not necessarily encouraged for men, or just for the community as a whole. In your opinion.
I would say, as a community as a whole, it was almost non-existent. Um, the whole society is programmed and taught that feelings are wrong, feelings are bad, emotions are not to be trusted or shown or followed or nothing. And so you have this whole group that is they're from my experience growing up, our primary concern was always like making everything look good. Like you had to look good. You had to be concerned. Your main concern was what others were thinking about you. Your concern was never like your own feelings. Never. That was that was the least important thing. The most important thing is what others think of you and making sure that you're following the rules and doing what's right in their eyes.
Hmm. Okay. So let's go back to your marriage. So now you're in Indiana, and you're raising a child, and then you have more come along. Um, Kind of walk us through your progression at that point. um, I guess through your late teenage years and into your 20s.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough. Honestly, after 15, things become a little bit of a blur. Um, I was I was full on just trying to do, trying to survive, trying to fit in, trying to do what I was supposed to do. Um, like I said, well, I guess I didn't actually say it, but I joined the church officially at 13. So, I'm a part of it. I'm a member. I'm a father. I'm trying to raise my kids. Um, but it's difficult for me to remember a lot of it. It was a lot of a lot of pain during my married years. It was not a super happy time, and so it's just difficult for me to remember a lot about it at a very deep level.
Mm. Yeah, I don't want you to have to reach in and talk about things you don't want to talk about, and I understand that. This is these are things that you've kind of put away, I suppose, since it was so difficult to deal with. Did you I guess in your 20s, was there a turning point when you recognized, or an aha moment when you recognized that, hey, maybe this isn't where I want to be?
There was never there was never that aha moment. Mine was a very long, difficult journey in which, in the end, I was forced out very slowly, very painfully. Um, I never reached that moment. I had a lot of questions, like things didn't make sense, as I mentioned before. More and more questions as time went on, but but I never reached that point. I never had the courage. I never decided, hey, this is not for me. I'm going to leave. It was through much pain and suffering that I finally got to the point that I couldn't be there any longer. But but no, I never had that aha moment. Not until many years after being out of it.
So, what age were you when you finally made the change and got out?
So somewhere in my mid 20s, maybe 26, 27. Um, don't remember exactly, but I had just a ton of stress in my life overall by that point. I had my own business. Um, it started, I think in 2005, 2006, I'd started a business doing reclaimed barn wood. We would take down old timber frame barns from the 1800s and sell the wood. Um, Started a company. I was selling to a company in Idaho. We um, we grew really fast, way too fast. Had bought sawmill, I bought trucks, I bought forklifts, skid steers. I was building a brand new shop on 12 acres. Like I was growing way too fast. This all happened in less than a year and a half. And the stress was just overwhelming. Stress in my personal life, my marriage falling apart, stress in my business. I ended up selling the company to the company in Idaho and went to work for them as a general manager. Um, and then, man, things really came to a head. I, uh, I still hadn't learned my lessons. I was still took the same principle from my business where things weren't going good, where I was overwhelmed and stressed and debt and financially stressed, and I was doing the same things in my personal life. And so I was trying to building a new house, 2,400 square foot timber frame house out of an old barn. Is kind of related to my business at the time. Um, and so I wasn't making enough money. At least that's the way it looked to me at the time. and ended up partnering kind of on the side with another guy. And um, anyway, just doing stupid stuff. I was using the other company's contract for my new partnership, and they found out and ended up firing me. It was a extremely devastating moment in my life, being fired from the company that I had started. And of course, here I am, three-fourths of the way through building this new house, doing most of the work myself, with friends helping. Um, no job, marriage falling apart. At this point, I'm still in the church, but I'm like pretty much almost ready to be done with it. Um, but the church had tried to step in and help with our marriage problems, trying to help with our financial problems in the house and all this stuff. And I was still kind of following along with it, um, as best I could, hanging on for dear life. They There's a lot of fear, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame programmed into you through that religion. Um, and so, especially having six kids, it was very difficult to think about leaving the church or the marriage. So anyway, the business, collapsed, I was fired from my job. Um, the mental stress, the house, all that was just too much. I ended up, my wife at the time, uh, there was an incident. She was on the phone talking to somebody about everything, and it upset me worse than ever. And I ended up getting really upset at her. And for the first time, I actually grabbed her by her throat. And um, the police got called. They separated me from my kids for a little bit, and then ended up putting me in a mental health facility. It was like a lockup facility. I was there about 24 hours. The only way they would let me out was if I agreed to go to Pennsylvania to an Amish facility where you can stay long term, and doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists would come in and work with you to get you on medication. So I did. I followed it. I went that route, Pennsylvania. I lived there for a few months, got on medications, and got to the point that they would release me to come home if I agreed to keep seeing a psychiatrist and psychologist once I got home. And so I did, but man, we went through a bunch of different medications. The side effects were horrible. Um, and it just kept getting worse and worse. I had high blood pressure at this point. I was way overweight. I got up to like 265 pounds. Um, and finally the day came, I said, it is enough. I'm not doing it anymore. I quit all my medications. I left the church. I was still in the marriage at this point, and leaving the church was the final tipping point for the marriage. That was the end of it. She couldn't handle that. She more or less went crazy over it. Just every little thing. I mean, I know this is hard for people to imagine, um, but just, me coming home in a t-shirt, center over the edge. Um, Growing up in the society, you didn't wear t-shirts. You had to have shirts with buttons on. That was one of the rules. The first day I came home wearing a regular ball cap. Again, complete mental breakdown for her, threatening to commit suicide. Just, it was a horrendous time. Um, and it obviously wasn't getting any better. So now I've started my own company again. I'm still kind of in the same business, but this time instead of selling the wood from the barns, I'm actually restoring them, moving them, putting them back up, for wedding event centers and homes, stuff like that. Um, and my marriage has continued to just fall apart. Thankfully, I'm doing a lot better health wise. I got into I the only way I could find to get off my blood pressure medicine, and I was determined to do so, was to start exercising. I fell in love with running. I fell in love with, well, actually, so fell in love with running first. I started running 10Ks, half marathons, even full marathons. Um, Lost some weight, got off my blood pressure medicine. Now I'm off all medications completely. And but the marriage is still going really bad. At this point, I've got to, I'm moving in and out some. I leave, I get my own apartment. I end up feeling guilty eventually. I come back. Like I said, very, very hard with 6 kids. But but the marriage is so bad, the relationship is so bad. It's just I can't stay there. I can't leave. What do I do? At this point, I'm traveling quite a bit for my work, so I ended up uh, my buddy and I that's working with me. We bought an RV together, camper, and so we're staying in that some. And now at this point, I'm pretty much living in it full time at his place if I'm not traveling because I'm just not staying at home much anymore at all. Um, but you know, I guess I should say at this point that I'm through all this, I'm still suffering extreme depression, very, very extreme depression. I had some friends, now outside the group that I made through running. Um, Eventually, I had a running injury and got it, couldn't run anymore for a while. And so I got into biking, went really hardcore into that as well, doing like 100-mile rides every weekend, training for a 160-mile ride across Indiana. We did that 3 years in a row. A buddy of mine did it together 3 years in a row, 160 miles one day,
Wow.
9 hours to be exact. Um, so yeah, a lot of biking, a lot of running still, and marriage still going down the tubes. My final big job that I did in this business, I actually moved a timber frame barn, sold it to a guy in Australia, moved it over there, shipped it in a container, went over there. It was over there for 3 weeks, I think. 4 weeks. 4 weeks I was in Australia. Put the barn back up for 2 weeks. Did a week and a half camping trip through the outback with the guy that bought the barn. Went a little tour of the outback. It was an experience of a lifetime, and yet through it all, I was still super depressed, trying to enjoy it, but finding it hard to enjoy anything at that point in my life. Got back home from that, and I had my two boys were working with me a little bit. One of them was the older one was probably, 15, I would say. The younger one was a few years behind him, but they would go to work with me during the summer. And I remember the day clearly. I'll never forget it. We were on our way to a job and I broke down, just started bawling like a baby on the way to work with my two boys. That was the end. I turned the truck around, took them home, never went back and finished that job. Called my brother who lived in Washington State. He's not part of the church. He grew up in it too, but he never joined it. And he was working out in Washington. Called him and asked him if he thought the place he worked would have a job for me. He talked to his boss. They said yes. I think 2 days later, 3 days later, I hooked up to my camper, got one of my daughters. She went with me, and we drove straight through cross country to Washington. Never, never looked back. That was the end of the marriage, the end of the suffering. It was not the end of the depression, but it was the beginning of the uphill. I
Wow.
finally got to the point that I realized I wasn't going to continue living this way, period. I wasn't going to continue living at all. And I could no longer use the excuse of my children to stay. Like, because it wouldn't work, right? I'm gonna kill myself. I'm not gonna make it. So I'm not gonna be there for my kids regardless. And that's gonna be more traumatic than if I just leave. So finally my mind got to that point and accepted it in the way I went.
Wow. Damn. Thank you for sharing all the details, man. I know, I mean, this is just such a large portion of your life. How old were you when you made this decision to move across country?
Um, 30, 33.
33 years old. Wow. That had to be incredibly difficult. I mean, it sounds like that was your rock bottom.
That was my rock bottom. Um, yes, it was extremely difficult. It's very difficult to explain it to people, but when you grow up in a society like that, all your friends, all your family are part of it. So to leave that group, you leave everything, everybody. I did have a few, I call them friends, that I'd made through running, but it's not like we were close in any way. We were just running buddies. So every close friend that I ever had was gone. I had nothing, nobody, except I did have my brother and his wife in Washington, which was a lifesaver for me, obviously.
And your brother, just rewind the clock here, he left early on and got out. Like, I mean, did you guys talk about it? Why he didn't join the religion?
No, I don't think we ever talked about it. Um, his wife actually had joined for a while, but then she left it. Um, it was not nearly as hard for her. A lot of her family were not part of it. They had been part, but had left, had gotten, you know, had different ideas about religion and spirituality and didn't fit in very well. And so they had left. And so she was in it for a while, but had left at this point. And her and, my brother and her had moved around some. They'd lived in Kansas for a while. They'd lived in, they'd started in Ohio, but uh, you know, didn't seem to fit in real well. So they moved to Kansas for a while, Washington. And they'd been out there for a long time at this point, 5, 7 years maybe. So they were pretty settled out there. Had a great job. He was a foreman in his company, and yeah, it was a great place for me to land for a while.
So you get there, this is your rock bottom, you get over there, and now what are you thinking? You're are you just in what is your mindset at this point?
Well, it is still a very difficult time for me. Still extreme depression. Um, I called myself, looking back, I say that I was literally the walking dead. I had no life left in me. People, where I went to work with my brother, people avoided me. I would walk across the parking lot with my head down. I mean, I had zero self-confidence. I had I had literally had only enough life left to function. Like I had no, there was, I was at the bottom for sure. Um, the Walking Dead, that's the best way I can describe myself at that point. And it was a long, slow journey coming back from it. Um,
At that point, when you calling yourself the Walking Dead, did anyone around you or anyone or yourself even think about talking to someone about it all, or like a therapist or just someone outside that you could talk to gain perspective?
No, no, not at that point. I had talked to therapists and counselors for years,
Mm.
trying to save the marriage and trying to save myself. Um, and I was done with it. I was done with all of it. I had no desire to talk to anybody or anything at that point. I was, I was as done could be. Um,
Ah,
wanted
so
nothing to do with anything or anybody at that point.
so it was almost the opposite effect for you in that all of the therapy and the talking to people really hadn't helped you in the past. So you felt like you had to go at this alone.
Absolutely.
You were completely on your own, and there was nobody that was going to help you.
Yep.
Wow. Holy cow. This is incredible. 33 years is a long time. 33 years is a very long time. I can't I don't know. I can't fathom what you're describing. In that being able to separate yourself and of course knowing the man you are today, um what a journey. Now you're we're going back, moving in with your brother. Can you sort of walk us through the stages of improvement in what were some of the triggers that kind of got you pulling your head up, and how you actually were able to do that without talking to people?
Yeah, so the job that I got out there is what saved me. I mean, there's nothing else because I was doing nothing else. Obviously I wasn't going to go to church. Um, and so work is all I had. I had no family except my brother, his kids. Um, no friends. I didn't know anybody in Washington, obviously. So work is all I had. And work saved me. Work gave me back my self-confidence. Within a year, I was also a foreman in the company. Um, I moved even beyond that in the 2 years I was there. I ended up taking over as the general manager of one of the divisions of the company, which put me basically at the top next to the owner, close to it. Um, and so that gave me back, my self-confidence. I was valued there, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. And that's what started to pull me back. It took a while um, to get there, but I got there eventually. And then, so work, the job, that was one thing. And then meeting a girl, my new wife, was the second thing.
So your mode when I'm just trying to figure out this transition from head down, no confidence to then being promoted to GM. Um, was your focus just so you were so focused on doing the job, doing it correctly, honoring the methods that were in front of you, and just doing it meticulously, reliably, like you were saying, honestly? Is that was sort of the thing that you knew you could do? So you just dug your heels in and just did that?
Yeah, at that point, I would say I was starving for that, right? Like I was starving for to feel valued, to feel respected, feel like I was somebody because I had been beat down so badly. And so this company, they're doing the same line of work as what I grew up in with my dad. So excavating. So it was something I was good at. It was natural because I grew up in it with him. Um, so I was able to, step in and immediately, learn quickly and take over and do a good job. Of course, it helped tremendously having my brother be, one of the top guys there already. Um, Not to say there wasn't some difficulties along the way, but it was, you know, it quickly became the medication that I was needing to pull me up.
Did you get into exercise in Washington like you did before with the running and biking?
Yes, it faded some. My last full marathon was in Australia. Um, I did a half marathon in Washington at night on trails in the woods. That was fun. Um, but I never did any more full marathons after that. Um, it, I was pretty busy with work, so I kept running. I had left my bike behind, so I didn't have that anymore. Um, Running was different in Washington. We had a little bit of a mountain there that I could run up, so that was a new challenge, making it the first time and then getting to where I could make it two times, and then even getting to where I could make it three times. I think it was a mile and a half up one way, um, and then looping back around. I forget the elevation, but it was quite different for me. I was a flatlander back in Indiana, so it was a new challenge to be able to run uphill. Um, so yeah, I kept it up for a while, but then, after meeting the girl, well, things started to take a new priority there instead of running so much.
Okay. So the new girl, new job, or well, by that time, I suppose you were pretty close to GM. Um, so where are you? You meet her. Let's talk a little bit about the spiritual side now. So
Mm.
you've got a lot of background, a lot of I guess you're holding a lot uh, through those 33 years. Talk us through what your spirituality progression was like at this point, and your view on that, because that had to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, so I need to back up a little bit. I forgot one important part of the story. After, leaving that church, that first group, um, there was actually a period where I worked for another company in Indiana after losing my job, getting back from Pennsylvania. And I became super close friends with a guy there that, had no affiliation with the Midnight Group and on anyway. Um, and he was aspiring to be a pastor, but he didn't have a church. He knew he was called to be a pastor. And he found this little church, a little Wesleyan church that they needed a pastor. And so he started pastoring there. And I was there to support him. At this point, I was still looking for something. I had left that midnight group. I had went to another church for a little while, didn't like it. So now I was just kind of floating around. So I started going with him and just to support him and got really into that, this new open church, even though from a general Christianity standpoint, it was still extremely conservative. But for me, it was very progressive, right? Coming from what I came from. Um, Little family run church, had maybe 70 people in it or something. And I started taking some of my kids sometimes because I wanted to, try to pull them away from the Mennonite thing if possible. And we started singing there at the church. Um, and I would get up, I'd give testimonies, I would stand up front with him. I was just there to support him, but I got kind of involved with him. And the two old people that started the church were still there. I really looked up to them. They were super powerful, and they were prayer warriors. And when they prayed, things happened. And I had for all my life, well, since I was 12 years old, I think. I had what I call pornography addiction, and I wanted to share this with them because I thought they could, pray and help me get over this. And so I did. I shared it with them, asked them to pray for me, and they said they would. A few days later, my best friend called me to tell me that they didn't want me to stand up front anymore. They didn't want me to stand behind the pulpit because that was a holy place. And I was a sinner since I had made this known. And they didn't want me to lead the song worship anymore. Um, I was still welcome there, but I was to go from here down to here now because I had made this known. And so that was another extremely devastating moment for me from a religion standpoint. So I say that to get back to your question. Now here I am in Washington, um, between the way I was raised and now this new incident. I was done with religion. Like I haven't to this day I haven't stepped foot inside a church. But back then in Washington, um, I was very much anti-religion, anti-God. I was the typical blame God for all this sort of thing. I did still believe in God. I just blamed him, I guess, for it. Not really so much blamed him. I just didn't want anything to do with anything God or religion. I was I was done, done, done.
So it was your view of God at that point. I mean, I can only imagine that it was judgmental, vindictive,
Oh yeah,
like all the negativity that you could possibly
mhm.
overlay there.
That was God. Yes.
Mm. I still don't understand how you go from that to where you are today. Like, how how do you get there? I mean, what are the pieces and parts that pulled you together to get to have the mindsets that you have today around spirituality?
Well, man, it's been a long journey. I mean, that's 9 years ago now, since 33 to 42. Um, and most of that journey is just simply withdrawing, right? I think that's an incredibly important part of the journey. I had to completely withdraw and forget as much as possible the religious brainwashing. So
Mm.
I consider that 7 years, I'll say, of of running away or forgetting or escaping as a very important part of the journey because to stay in that mindset, you could never get to this one, right?
So, what did that do for you? Was this a time for you to, um, did you shed? Were you slowly shedding the the your earlier spirituality, your thoughts around it? Like, what was it to you? This time frame.
Well, looking back, I would say I had no spirituality growing up. I had only religion. And that's what I was trying to drop. That's what I'm trying to escape from. For example, um, the group I grew up in, they believe the only correct version of the Bible is the King James Version. And so to this day, I I don't read much Bible, period, because I'm trying to, and when any time that I have read, I have to read it in a different version. Like I want to I'm trying to escape that King James verbiage that I had to listen to for so many years. Um, and the same thing goes with religion. Like I'm just trying to forget it. I'm trying to escape it. I'm trying to let it go. And so I'm basically running the opposite direction, right?
So it sounds like when what you describe is sort of getting away for those 7 or so years, you really were exploring. Like you're exploring everything else that was not part of the religion that you grew up with. Like just you're on this exploration journey. Would that be right to say that?
Uh, Probably not how I would say it, because I consider myself to be on an exploration journey now, but the first part of that was just simply trying to forget any of this exists. Like, I don't want nothing to do with spirituality, religion, nothing. I just forget it all. I'll just work.
So when did that change? When did you say, you know
You would
what?
ask that.
Yeah.
Well, eventually, and I can't pinpoint the time, but eventually enough time passed to kind of relax. I'm no longer desperately running the other way. I'm just simply floating along, right? So now I'm a little more relaxed. I'm a little more open to whatever. But at this point, whatever has to be the opposite of what I had before. That's for sure. Damn sure. Um, I I cannot pinpoint the time. I know it's been a couple of years ago, but somewhere, somehow, in there's no answer for why I started asking these questions other than they were divinely inspired. But a couple of years ago, I started asking the question, where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? And who am I? Of course, I don't think all four questions came to me at once. They just started, one at a time, maybe, but they developed into those four questions. And one major event that changed my life, at this point in my life, I had never read books other than, fiction books that I was an adrenaline junkie. So I liked, movies with a lot of violence, books with a lot of violence, things that would keep my attention, but never read a real book. Um, and I started a program called 75 Hard. I'm sure you've probably heard of it. And one of the things that that program did that changed my life was teaching me to read, right? Reading, what is it, 10 minutes or 10 pages a day, something like that. Um, and so that got me to reading a little bit of like self-development type books. Um, and then these questions came up, and after starting to ask those questions, things really started to change, and new books started coming into my life. Um, at this point, we're living in Tennessee. My wife, I'd married this girl in Washington. We had moved to Tennessee to be a little closer to my family in Indiana, in Ohio, but not too close, as far south as I could be. And I'm working a job. I've got my own business, but we're working on a project south of Nashville. I live north of Nashville, so every day I'm driving through rush hour traffic in Nashville twice a day. And I discovered audiobooks. And instead of this being a horrible drive twice a day, it became the best time of my life. I still miss those days. I drive a lot now, but it's in real short segments. I don't have that long drive. It's 20 minutes between projects now. But anyway, listen to audiobooks, and man, that just one thing after another. That's the journey since then. But I point back to those questions. That's what really changed for me, was starting to ask those questions.
And so did you get enlightenment on answers to each one of these questions as you asked them? Did you start seeing or feeling these answers?
Yes, slowly, little by little. in a never-ending journey that's still ongoing as we speak.
Wow. And where, so you mentioned getting remarried. You're with your now wife. Um, what was there any impact with your relationship with her that triggered any of this, or how is she spirituality, and how does that feed you?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's super cool that she is on the exact opposite extreme as me when it comes to religion. Um, she grew up in Vietnam, moved here about 9 years ago. Um, didn't speak any English when she moved here. Couldn't even order at a restaurant. She tried. They teach him to say hello, how are you, and that's about it in English when you grow up in Vietnam. And so her dad lived here in Washington, and her mom lives in Vietnam. And her dad is Catholic, and her mom is Christian Buddhist, I'll call it. Um, so a lot of Buddhism in Vietnam, but she had a little bit of Catholic influence once she got here, but she had never read a Bible before she met. So now here I am, this religion indoctrinated person that knows most of the Bible by heart, married to someone that doesn't know the Bible at all. And it was a extremely good experience for me in that her innocence. Like I have these pre-programmed ideas of what a verse might mean in the Bible, and she sees it with no filter. She's looking at it for the very first time, and you know, it was an eye-opening experience for me to see things through her eyes instead of my rose-colored glasses.
That is wild. It's a reminder. It's a reminder for me, based on your story, that I mean, we all come up with certain upbringings, and you learn what you learn, right? I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent. Not not saying that these aren't baked in great intentions, because I believe they are. I really truly believe that there are so many cultures and religions and all of the the ways that we're brought up around the world that are well intentioned, and yet you go across the world, you've got your wife, and she knows nothing about the way you were raised, and yet you were raised in such a fashion that said that if you didn't do what you did, you'd be, living in hell. And so it's amazing to me that we have examples of this. Your wife is a real person who, if you believe in God, you believe that she was brought here and made by God. So why would that, how is this discrepancy there? And that's just such an interesting. I love your story there, man. It's so special. And so, would you say that she sort of helped in a way, kind of, or is she helping? I suppose I should say that present tense, just continue to open you up and allow you to see that your perspective may be even broader than what you see now.
Absolutely, she has helped tremendously. I mentioned the Buddhist thing because it's an important part of it for me. Um, here I am deeply in love with this girl that, has some Buddhist leanings. I mean, she's not Buddhist, but she knows a lot about it. She's been taught that in her country. And so that was a huge part of opening me up. I mean, can you imagine the hell and damnation I would have faced in my religion for even mentioning the word Buddhist?
Oh
And
yeah.
now here I am, I have no choice but to be open to it because I love her so much, right? And so So that was a huge part of opening me up. And I remember the first time we visited a Buddhist temple in Houston here, and I couldn't understand any of it because it was all Vietnamese, but it was still a monumental step on my journey to set in a Buddhist temple. But yeah, absolutely, I owe that to her to just make me open to whatever. I mean, that's a huge part of spirituality, I think.
Wow. What do you when you think of the word belief? Because I think that you've said this in the past. You've talked about belief or believing. I'm curious how that one word, belief, how that has changed in your life. Did you believe when you were younger? What was the word belief even in your vocabulary at that point? In the way you see it now, and how has that word sort of changed in your journey?
Well, it's a bit of a tough one, I because I recognize the importance of belief. The challenge, I think, is where is your belief coming from? Because if your belief, as mine was for so many years, programmed into your mind from outside sources, it's not even your own belief, it's somebody else's. And so, where spirituality has taken me is developing my own beliefs. Belief is still important. I still have my beliefs, but they're coming from a completely different place. They're not coming from somebody outside of me telling me how to believe. They're coming from within me deciding how to believe. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's what I was curious about it. So when you were younger, you were accepting others' beliefs, which to me, does that mean that you haven't grown to have your own beliefs? You're adopting others, and I, that sounds so simple, but I mean, how many of us in the world are living that way, through until we die? I mean, I would say that it's very difficult to not only understand that, but to actually change it and do what you've done to establish your own beliefs after you've been indoctrinated and held so many other people's beliefs and other cultural beliefs. Um, but I think more importantly, you've mentioned before about believing in who you are. And I wanted you to sort of expand on that. And it goes back to your question of who am I? Can you kind of share where you are with that?
Absolutely. So I brought up those four questions because, like I said, that was a huge turning point in my life. Um, but there's only one question I believe now, and that is, who am I? That question I call the universal question. It is the question that answers all other questions. It is the question that answers every problem this world faces. No question, there is no question that cannot be answered by answering that question. And as I mentioned earlier, the answer to that question is a journey that will last a lifetime. It's not something that you just suddenly click and you come up with the answer. I mean, I had an answer, the start of the answer, a year and a half ago, and it's continued to develop to where I am sitting here with you today. Um, and that is, now I am discovering that the answer to that question lies in the truth that we are all one, that separatism, the belief we are separate, is just an illusion. The truth is we are all one. And that's why I say that question will answer all other questions. That question will solve all world problems. The answer to that question lies in so many truths that Jesus said that never made sense to me growing up in religion. So many, what do we call them? Esoterical truths. Like if somebody takes your coat, give him your cloak too. Like if somebody steals from you, give him everything he wants plus more. Do you know anybody that actually lives that way?
No.
Do you know how many people would live that way if they realized we're all one? See, it all makes sense. It's what Jesus was trying to teach. But religion has taken and twisted it. And did I answer your question? I get
Yeah.
carried away sometimes.
No, no, you do, man. That's great. Um, I see you have a "I survived the weekend" shirt on. You just finished your first Thumos weekend. How has Thumos impacted this journey of yours? Um, you know, both spiritually, with your job, with pretty much your marriage, with everything.
Yeah, so Thumos has been an amazing part of my journey. Um, Even when I joined Thumos 6 months ago, I was nowhere near where I'm at now. Um, and you probably know that. I think I think you were one of the first ones I met with and talked to as I joined Thumos. So you've probably seen some changes in me since then. Um, but yeah, man, having Thumos, having that support group and that place of acceptance, you know, I was looking for that when I found Thumos. I was looking hard. I didn't hardly know what I was looking for, but I just knew I was looking for something where where I could be accepted no matter how what I am, who I am. Um, where men were just trying to be better men without the religion, without the garbage, without the surface level junk. Um, and then I found Thumos, and yeah, it's been part of my journey. I mentioned, after asking those questions, you know, books started coming into my life, and that's one of the things I've learned is I don't look for them to come. I just wait. I don't go out looking for another book to read. I just keep reading the same one, and then suddenly another one just falls into my lap. And Thumos has been a part of that. I had not read the Four Agreements until Jody mentioned. I had heard of it, but I hadn't read it. And then once he brought it up, I read the Four Agreements, and another great book to my collection. Um, and so yeah, the weekend,
If you could sum up the weekend in two sentences, what would you say?
the weekend was a life-changing event, full of connection, full of emotional healing, peace, love, and brotherhood like I've never ever seen or experienced or heard of in my life.
Okay.
Can't
That's
wait to go
beautiful,
back
man.
again.
I tell you, that's beautiful. That is beautiful, man. Well, Kyle, before we roll out here, what piece, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing such, being vulnerable and really sharing some of the deep scars that I know that are there from your, early on in your life, and really sharing those for the podcast here. Um, I mean, that's an incredible story you've got. And to think that you're 42 years old now and you're sort of just getting started is really, really exciting. Um, you've mentioned a couple of times you've got it's a lifelong journey. This answering these questions and exploring and understanding who you are. And I love that. I love that idea. Given everything you've known, if somebody were to come up to you now and just ask you for a piece of advice that didn't go through what you went through, just a piece of advice, what and I would say that it's spiritually, what would you tell them?
Question everything. I would say question everything. I would say, along with that, remember Tony Robbins' advice: if you want better answers, learn to ask better questions. So I say question everything because I come from a place of extreme um, programming, right? And only by questioning that was I able to escape it. And I say ask better questions because eventually I got to the point where I asked what I considered the best question. So that's my advice. Um, if you want better answers, learn to ask better questions. And I don't know a better one than who am I?
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for that, man. That's nice. Um,
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. Um, One last thing I want to throw out there that I think is really important. So you heard a lot of pain from my history, right?
mhm.
Coming through. I just want to share this last perspective. Um, by answering or beginning to answer those four questions, I look back on my past and all the people that caused me such pain with absolute gratitude and love. Like I have more gratitude for the pain and the people that put me through it than any good thing in my life because I now realize that I needed to go through that in order to get where I am today. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. So I'm super grateful for everything that happened to me, for all that pain that I went through, and for the place that it's brought me today. The peace, the absolute, overwhelming, unspeakable peace that I am now experiencing was worth 10 lifetimes of that times 10.
Thank you for sharing that. That's incredible. And Kyle, thanks again. Thanks again for coming on the podcast today. I want to thank everybody else out there for listening to Thumos School for Men. If you like what you've heard today, be sure to follow us. We're on social media. We've got the website, Thumos School for Men. And also, if you're a man out there looking for growth, purpose, and impact, be sure to contact us for the next Thumos weekend. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Kyle, man, I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful week. And man, I'm glad to be a part of your journey. And thank you so much for sharing and being on the podcast today.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody. With that, we're out.